Candace Owens walked into the marble lobby of Whitmore and Langston LLP like she had nothing to prove, because she didn't. Still, every eye in the room followed her like she was crashing the country club. She wore a sleek black blazer, no jewelry, no entourage, just her. A woman known for controversy, control, and saying the things that made half the world flinch. But today wasn't about politics. It was about legacy. She was there for the will reading of Richard Whitmore, an old money media mogul she'd worked with, briefly but intensely, on a conservative speaking tour that helped revive his reputation in his final years. Their relationship was complicated. He was racist, sure, but polite about it. She was outspoken, sure, but strategic. She never expected an invitation. Yet here it was, gold embossed and hand-delivered. As she stepped into the private conference room, silence fell. The Whitmore family was already seated. Cold stares, half smirks, polished smiles with clenched teeth. One of the grandsons whispered to his sister, just loud enough. "Guess the help got lost." Candace didn't blink. She took a seat near the back, quiet, watching. She wasn't here for them. She was here because Richard Whitmore had told her once, long after the cameras stopped rolling. One day, they'll learn who really earned it. And today might just be that day. The attorney, a pale, silver-haired man in a three-piece suit, cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. As executor of Richard Whitmore's estate, I'll be reading the final will and testament, executed 6 months prior to his death." The Whitmore heirs sat up straighter. His son Gregory smirked confidently. His daughter Evelyn crossed her legs and raised her eyebrows like she was about to win a silent argument. Their adult children glanced over at Candace again, smirk still firmly in place. No one offered her water. No one spoke to her. She was used to that. The attorney began. "To my son Gregory, you will receive the property in Aspen." Gregory gave a smug nod. "To my daughter Evelyn, you will receive the yacht, the Caroline, docked in Charleston." Evelyn smiled tightly. "And to my grandchildren, you will each receive an annual trust of $50,000, contingent on maintaining full-time employment." A few murmurs. Candace sat still. Then the air changed. "And finally," the attorney said, voice unwavering, "the remainder of my estate, including my controlling shares of Whitmore Media Group, my personal residence in Connecticut, and the foundation endowment, shall be transferred in full to—" He paused. Miss Candace Owens' silence, then a single scoff, followed by a sharp intake of breath, and then chaos. "What the hell is this?" Gregory barked, half rising from his chair. "She's not even family," Evelyn snapped. Candace leaned back, crossing her arms slowly. She didn't need to say a word. "Not yet." "You can't be serious," Evelyn hissed, rising to her feet like her designer heels gave her moral high ground. "This is some kind of joke." She barely knew him. The attorney didn't flinch. "Mr. Whitmore updated his will in October. Everything is documented, witnessed, and notarized." Candace stayed seated, calm. Gregory jabbed a finger toward her. "This is political. She used him, manipulated him with all that conservative garbage. This is fraud." Candace tilted her head slightly. "Interesting theory, but if I was manipulating him, don't you think I'd have taken control while he was still alive?" The attorney cleared his throat again. "There is also a personal letter Mr. Whitmore left for Ms. Owens." He handed her a thick envelope, sealed in wax with a W. Candace took it gently, but didn't open it. "Not yet." Evelyn leaned across the table, eyes sharp. "He gave you everything? The house? The media company? You were a guest speaker." Candace met her gaze. "And yet I was the only one who stayed in touch after the cameras stopped rolling. The only one who called him on his birthday. The only one who listened when he couldn't remember his wife's name." Silence. The heirs stared at her like she'd grown a second head. But the truth was simple. They thought she was a tool. Turns out, she was the legacy. Candace waited until the room emptied. Gregory and Evelyn stormed out first, mumbling threats about legal teams. The grandchildren followed, some embarrassed, some fuming. One of them filming under the table, probably for TikTok. She stayed behind. Opened the envelope slowly, like it might still be warm from the man who wrote it. Inside, a single handwritten page. "Candace, they'll never understand. You weren't my blood. You were better. You challenged me, argued with me, didn't let me rot into a stereotype. You made me think, something my children never dared to do. This company, this house, this legacy, it was never for them. It's yours now. Do what I never had the courage to do. Fix what I broke. Say what I wouldn't. And if they ask why tell them I finally learned what family really means. Candace folded the letter carefully, then stared out the window of the boardroom. She remembered their long arguments backstage during the speaking tour. How he'd whisper things like off the record, and she'd still challenge him. She remembered catching him watching her during Kihu and Oz, not with arrogance, but with something close to respect. She didn't know it then, but those moments planted the seed that grew into today. They thought she was just an instrument, but Harold Whitmore, he'd seen the conductor. The elevator ride down from the law office felt longer than it should have. Candace stood alone, envelope tucked in her coat, heart pounding beneath layers of control. She had just inherited a mansion, a multi-million-dollar media empire, and a last wish that read like a mission. But in that moment, all she felt was quiet. Outside, paparazzi were already gathering. Word had leaked. Of course it had. The woman who had built a career criticizing cultural narratives had just been handed the reins to one of the oldest conservative media families in America. The cameras flashed. She didn't flinch. A reporter shouted, "Ms. Owens, do you feel like you deserve this inheritance?" She paused, looked directly at him, and said calmly, "Ask me that question again in a year." Then she slipped into the black car waiting for her and shut the door. Inside, silence returned. She looked down at her phone. Dozens of messages, some congratulations, some threats, some confusion. But one stood out from her husband. "Whatever this becomes, lead it your way." Candace exhaled slowly. She hadn't asked for this empire, but maybe she was made for it. And the people who humiliated her back in that boardroom, they were about to learn, inheritance isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when no one else does. 3 days later, Candace stood at the gates of the Whitmore estate, a sprawling colonial mansion nestled in Connecticut's wealthiest zip code. Everything about it screamed generational money, but what it didn't scream was her. The security guard didn't open the gate at first, just stared, suspicious, until she held up the deed. Legal, binding, final. It clicked open without another word. The car crept up the driveway past trimmed hedges and pristine fountains, all curated to impress donors and silence outsiders. But Candace wasn't there to be impressed. She was there to take ownership. At the front door, a butler, yes, a real one, opened the door halfway. "May I help you?" She gave him a slow once-over. "I'm not a guest," she said, holding up the letter again. "I'm the new owner." His face barely moved, just a faint twitch at the corner of his mouth. Then he stepped aside. Inside, the air was thick with old money and secrets, dustless shelves, cold oil portraits of Whitmore ancestors, but none of her, not yet. As she moved through the halls, staff watched from a distance. Whispers trailed behind her heels, some confused, some resentful. One maid offered a quiet smile, like she knew what it meant for someone like Candace to walk those floors. And in that moment, Candace understood something deeper. She hadn't just inherited a house, she had invaded a dynasty, and the foundation was already starting to crack. The library was where she felt it first. Not the grandeur, anyone could fake wood panels and antique globes, but the silence. The kind of silence that didn't come from emptiness, but from secrets held too long. Candace ran her fingers along the spines of books she knew had probably never been read. Then something caught her eye. A small leather box tucked behind a set of dusty legal volumes labeled Legacy Planning. She pulled it down. Inside, a folded envelope marked in Richard Whitmore's distinct script. But this one wasn't addressed to her. It was addressed to the next Whitmore, underlined twice. Candace hesitated, then opened it. "If you're reading this, then the truth has already caused problems. Let it. I built this empire on money. You, whoever you are, must rebuild it on something else. The press will hate you, the family will curse your name. But if I've chosen you, it's because I finally understood legacy isn't about control. It's about correction." Candace's hands shook. He'd known. He knew what the fallout would be. He knew she'd face backlash, ridicule, even betrayal. And he left this anyway, a warning, but also permission, not just to inherit, but to change everything. Candace folded the letter and placed it back in the box. Correction wouldn't be easy, but it was overdue, and she wasn't going to wait for anyone's approval to begin. By sunrise, it was everywhere. Controversial commentator inherits conservative empire. Candace Owens named sole beneficiary in Whitmore will. Family furious. From panelist to power broker, the new queen of Whitmore media? Candace sat in the kitchen of the estate, drinking black coffee under the stunned gaze of the house staff. Someone had definitely leaked it. Probably Gregory or Evelyn, but it didn't matter. The narrative had already slipped from their fingers. Her phone vibrated nonstop. Mentions, calls, think pieces. Some praised her, many mocked her, a few made it personal. She's a parasite. This is what happens when you sell your soul to rich white men. She conned an old man, and now she wants to rebrand it as justice. She read them all. Then she opened a fresh document on her laptop. Press release, draft 1. I did not ask for Mr. Whitmore's inheritance. I earned his trust. I didn't expect power, but now that I have it, I intend to use it. Outside the estate gates, a growing line of cameras waited. She stood slowly, adjusted her jacket, and walked to the front porch. The mansion behind her belonged to a name that once silenced voices like hers. Now, it would amplify them. Candace stepped out onto the Whitmore estate's front steps, facing a sea of flashing cameras and raised microphones. Reporters elbowed for position, some yelled questions. Others just stared, curious, skeptical, hungry. She didn't wait for silence. She created it. I know why you're all here, she began, voice steady, measured. And I know what you're expecting. A scandal, a plot twist, a gotcha moment. She paused. Let the tension stretch. But here's what you're going to get instead. Truth. The crowd quieted. Richard Whitmore was not perfect. He was, in fact, a product of a system that taught him power was something to pass to people who looked like him. But in the end, he saw through that lie. Some camera shutters clicked faster. A few reporters leaned in. He gave me everything not because of politics, not because of controversy, but because I showed up. When his family didn't. When his empire was on the edge. When he was alone. She looked directly into one camera lens. I didn't steal this legacy. I'm protecting it from rot. A reporter finally found his voice. What do you plan to do with Whitmore Media? Candace's smile was sharp and unapologetic. Rebuild it. And make sure the next voice that gets silenced doesn't. She turned and walked back inside. The mic had been theirs for decades. Now, it was hers. The next morning, Candace walked into the Whitmore Media headquarters like she owned the place, because now she did. Old executives in navy suits whispered behind conference room glass. Anchors glanced up from their scripts. Some looked worried, others amused. She went straight to the 12th floor, formerly Richard Whitmore's office. The walls were lined with black and white portraits of conservative greats. Reagan, Buckley, her face wasn't there, not yet. She called an emergency staff meeting. One of the senior producers, an older man named Carter Briggs, leaned back in his chair and chuckled. This is theater, he muttered. You don't just walk in here and start dictating, Candace smiled. I'm not dictating, I'm disrupting. She pulled out a folder, slid it to the center of the table. Effective immediately, we're launching a new vertical, Voices Unfiltered. It's for the people this network has ignored for decades. Whistleblowers, young activists, even those on the so-called other side. Carter scoffed. You'll tank the brand. No, she said calmly. I'll evolve it. Or bury it trying. The room fell into stunned silence. Candace stood. You're either in or you're out. But understand this. I'm not here to protect comfort. I'm here to honor correction. She left the room without waiting for applause. Outside, staffers whispered. Inside, history was shifting. And Candace had just lit the first match. It took less than 48 hours. Headlines exploded. Candace Owens turns Whitmore Media into activist outlet. Anonymous insider, she's tearing down everything my grandfather built. Conservative empire hijacked? Gregory and Evelyn weren't quiet anymore. They booked interviews, cried on cable news, painted themselves as victims of manipulation. She was never family, Evelyn sobbed to a host. My father was confused, isolated. She used that. Gregory, red-faced on another network. She's undoing decades of tradition. And for what? A social experiment? Candace didn't flinch, but her inbox overflowed with death threats, podcast takedowns, and headlines that called her everything but her name. Then came the anonymous op-ed in the Whitmore Journal, a paper owned by one of the cousins. She's not here to carry on a legacy. She's here to burn it down. Candace read it once, then emailed her team. Good. Let them feel the heat. That means we're touching something real. Still, that night, alone in the mansion, it got quiet. Too quiet. She opened Harold's first letter again, reread the final line. They will never understand you, but one day they'll understand what you did. She folded it slowly. Candace Owens had been under fire before, but this time the flames were hers to control. And tomorrow she'd aim them where they mattered most. They thought they had her cornered. One of Whitmore Media's former executives leaked an edited clip from years ago, Candace mid-sentence, taken wildly out of context. They paired it with anonymous sources, claiming she bullied staff, doctored memos, even pushed Richard Whitmore into rewriting the will. The smear campaign was relentless. Not My Legacy trended for hours. Networks she once guest starred on refused to cover her side. Advertisers backed out. One affiliate station cut ties entirely. Candace watched it unfold from the mansion library, phone lighting up every second with fresh outrage. And still, she didn't panic. She called a press conference, not in a studio, not on friendly turf, but on the front lawn of the Whitmore estate. She stepped up to the mic. No makeup, no spin team, just truth. You can twist my words, you can spin my story, but what you won't do is erase the facts. She paused. Richard Whitmore chose me, not because I was convenient, but because I was necessary. Then she dropped a bombshell. I'm releasing every email, every signed video statement, every document proving our working relationship and his intentions. And when you see the truth, ask yourselves one thing. Who are you really afraid of? Me? Or what it means that I earned this without your permission? The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to. Because silence that deep meant the power had shifted, and no one could take it back now. The next morning, Candace hit upload. A 17-minute video went live across every platform, unedited, raw, time-stamped. In it, Richard Whitmore spoke directly to camera from his study, frail but clear-eyed. If you're watching this, I'm probably gone, and I already know how my family will spin it. He coughed, then continued. Let me be plain. Candace Owens didn't manipulate me. She challenged me. She reminded me what courage looks like. He paused, looking directly into the lens. I am giving her my legacy because she earned it. Full stop. Candace followed the video with a link to scanned documents. The updated will, emails, text messages. Every legal step documented, notarized, irrefutable. And just like that, the storm began to reverse. The hashtags shifted. Receipts trended. Supporters rallied. Even some former critics fell quiet. Gregory and Evelyn tried to counter with another interview, but this time, no one bought it. Commentators now dissected their absence in Richard's final years. Clips surfaced of them mocking him off mic. The court of public opinion flipped. Candace didn't gloat. She got back to work. Because this was never about proving she could lead. It was about proving she would. And now that the noise faded, the mission was louder than ever. Correct the system that tried to erase her, from the inside out. 1 week later, Candace stood in the Whitmore Media broadcast studio, but not to deliver a monologue. This time, she had guests. Teenagers from the south side of Chicago. A young journalism student from Howard. A trans woman with a podcast about prison reform. And a 15-year-old coder who'd built a local news app that exposed a school board scandal. The cameras rolled. The lights were soft. And Candace didn't dominate the stage. She opened it. We're launching Project Open Signal, she announced. A new initiative under Whitmore Media to fund, mentor, and amplify underrepresented voices in journalism, tech, and storytelling. Someone gasped behind the lens. A conservative empire was now funding Activists. Candace smiled. Because truth isn't partisan, and storytelling isn't exclusive. Reporters called it a pivot. Critics called it betrayal. But the kids, they called it hope. Later that evening, Candace sat alone on the back steps of the mansion. She looked out across the grounds where oil portraits still loomed. She didn't want to burn the building. She wanted to fill it with voices no one expected to be heard here. And tonight, she had. The Whitmore name once meant silence and legacy. Now, it meant opportunity. And Candace Owens had rewritten its meaning on her own terms. The anniversary of Richard Whitmore's passing arrived quietly. No parade, no tribute special, no family gathering. Just a small event at the newly renamed Whitmore Owens Media Foundation headquarters. Candace stood before a modest crowd. Interns, young creators, a few journalists who once doubted her, and a handful of former Whitmore staff who now called her boss without hesitation. She took the podium with no speech in hand, just memory. "I was never supposed to be in this room," she said. "Not because I wasn't qualified, but because rooms like this weren't built with people like me in mind." A hush fell. No tweets, no flashes, just listening. "I didn't inherit a brand. I inherited a mess, one rooted in fear, image, and power hoarding. But Mr. Whitmore gave me something no money can buy, permission to break the pattern." She glanced to the crowd, then toward the portrait of Richard now hanging beside hers. "I was humiliated the day his will was read. Called a fraud, a propriedad, an outsider," she smiled. "But today we've trained 50 new journalists. We've funded local truth-tellers. We've changed what this place represents." The crowd rose in quiet applause. And as Candace stepped off the stage, she didn't feel like a symbol. She felt like what Richard had seen in her from the beginning, the future. And this time, it had her name on it. Candace Owens, the woman who inherited everything and gave it meaning.